What's going on, everybody? Today's video, we're going to go over some common materials that people use to make splitters and the pros and cons of each one. So, over the years, when I used to do more car builds, I made splitters out of all sorts of materials, whether it's what the customer wanted or for some reason or another, it's just what I decided to use. So, real common ones: plywood, alumilite, carbon fiber. Other might be, I've seen people make splitters out of solid sheets of aluminum. But we're going to go over the pros and cons to try and help you figure out what might be the best for you. This is a little bit more of a DIY thing. I know a lot of people make their own splitters, so hopefully this video will kind of highlight, what might be advantageous for some material and not others. Alright, so we're going to start with plywood. Now, the very first splitter I ever built for my own car was plywood. I actually like plywood. Some of the pros are, it's cheap. You can pick it up at any, Home Depot Racing, Lowe's Racing, your local hardware store. It's easy to work. Obviously cutting it to shape, just a regular jigsaw will kind of get you there. Another benefit is you can countersink your hardware. So if you use some flat-headed screws, when you bolt them down, you can get a very flush surface that way. So that's kind of a benefit as well. And then the last benefit, again, with it being easy to work, you can round the leading edge. You can round off the leading edge, so that way, when the air hits it, it can kind of accelerate underneath of it. I'll put a video up here of splitter angle and I get into it a little bit more, but basically if you have a splitter and say you just cut, so we're looking at it from the side, if you were to just cut your splitter material flat, when the air comes in and hits this, you'll get kind of spillage off of the front, and then this is where the rest of the car would be. So what you can do with plywood is kind of give yourself a nice radius leading edge. Cons: heavy. It requires some post-finishing, post-work. Again, going back to my car, I had a plywood splitter on it for about 5 seasons before I went off track and ripped it off. But what I did was I just painted it. I used the 1/2-inch pre-sanded stuff, the stuff that comes smooth already. Once I kind of shaped it, got everything I wanted to, painted it, and it kind of hung in there for several seasons, racing in the rain, washing it. The car sat outside actually for the first 2 seasons of me racing it. So, there will be post work on it, but doesn't mean it can't be made to last. So yeah, that's kind of the pros and cons of plywood. I guess what would be in the middle would be strength. I don't know how I want to do this. Strength. It's pretty strong. I usually recommend a 1/2-inch plywood. I've seen people make them out of 3/4-inch plywood, and when they went off track, it actually bent the frame of the car when it ripped the splitter off. So you can actually make them too strong, but you can also make them too weak. I've seen people try and use 1/4-inch Luan, subflooring. It's so flimsy that one little tiny hit and it ends up breaking. So I usually recommend a 1/2-inch plywood. But the strength, you can get away with, not a lot of mounting points. That kind of saves a little bit of weight, but not so few that, you only need 4 points on the whole splitter. So that's kind of why it's about the middle. So that about wraps up plywood. The next one we're going to go to plywood. Let's do alumilite, another really popular option I see a lot of people use. Alright, so alumilite, let's start with the pros. It's obviously very light. I think that's about it for the pros for Alumilite. It's got that going for it. Cons, it's weak. I've seen people, and I've made them for customers in the past, where you go off track and one little tiny hit and it ends up getting bent or folded or cracked, whatever. So the weakness makes you have to make a lot of mounting points. So lots of mounts. So that kind of just adds fab time, adds weight, adds cost. So that isn't going for it. It's kind of hard to work. Yeah, you can cut through it with a jigsaw pretty easily, but that's about all you can do. So like I did the little plywood diagram down here, you can't like radius that leading edge very nicely. So you kind of get disturbance right off of that leading edge and everything. It's generally expensive. I guess it's expensive compared to plywood. Again, going back to when I did them, I was able to get them, a 4x8 sheet I think was around $200 if I remember right, but that was probably 6 years ago when I did those. You might have a source where you can get them for like $100, or it might be a pain for you to get. So availability might be in the middle. Could be easy for you to get, could be hard for you to get, so that's something to consider as well. Yeah, generally, like I mentioned, I don't like Alumilite. That's kind of all I have to say about Alumilite. Yeah, on to the next one. Let's do ABS or some sort of like plastic. I've made splitters in the past, actually out of giant sheets of like plastic. I don't think it was ABS, but I'll lump them together. Some of the pros, easy to work. Oops. Again, you can kind of round that edge generally because it's a solid piece of whatever. Let's see. Weight would be like in the middle of all of our options. Depending on what material you go with, price would again be in the middle. Cons, they're usually really weak. Unless you go with something that's relatively thick. But then at that point, it would be heavy. Hopefully that makes sense. You could go with like a thinner plastic, which would bring the weight down, but then you need to add a bunch of mounts. So, it kind of falls almost in the middle depending on how thick of a sheet of ABS or plastic you go with. You don't see a lot of splitters at the track made out of these materials. They're usually a little bit hard to find sheets that large, I guess. So we'll kind of just move on from this already. It's not a very popular option. Alright, so I've seen people make splitters out of solid sheets of about like 1/8 inch or 3/8 inch aluminum. The pro is it's very strong. And if you do go off track and say the front gets like bent up, it doesn't rip the splitter off, you can usually, I want to say repair it. Wouldn't really be like a repair, but if it gets bent, you can kind of bend it back down and kind of keep running. So repair or straighten at the track. So that's kind of a pro. Con, very heavy. Whoops, can almost write. A-V, Jesus. Alright, heavy. Yeah, they're usually pretty heavy, and they're usually pretty weak for that weight. So it's got a relatively low strength to weight ratio, which will make you, again, get to that stage of like having to use extra mounts and all that stuff. So, again, also not a very popular option. usually hard for most people to get a sheet large enough to make an entire splitter. So yeah, just consider that if you want to go with a solid sheet of aluminum. Not the greatest in my opinion. Alright, carbon fiber. Obviously my favorite, it's kind of what we do. I'll put a tag up here to our cardboard to carbon video. Carbon is getting a little bit out of the DIY range. I have seen people kind of attempt it on their own. But obviously the pro is strength, weight is low. Workability, I guess that would be, for the average person, that would be a con. Because most people don't have, vacuum pumps. You need all the consumable materials to end up with the carbon splitter. So workability is a con generally. Price, out of all the materials we went over, a carbon fiber splitter is obviously the most expensive for the materials. Plus you kind of need to form it into your actual splitter. So back to the pros, the strength, sort of like the plywood, it's such a strong material for its weight. You can get away with very few mounting points, which then opens up the options of, you save more fab time, you save more weight, and having to have less mounting points. It's usually a little bit easier to come up with some sort of quick mountable solution for getting your car on and off the trail or working on your vehicle, whatever. So, so the strength to weight kind of lends itself down the line to other advantages that a lot of people might not realize. So, again, it could be, the front edge can be rounded, so you can kind of get that advantage. I guess a con, there are some other companies out there that sell a carbon fiber splitter, which is just one layer of carbon backed with fiberglass. So be careful for that, because you aren't really getting carbon, you're basically getting fiberglass. Those are very weak and heavy for their, size. So consider that. But yeah, carbon would be the one, I would kind of like the most, obviously, if cost isn't really an issue. We can make them for you if you want to go that carbon route. Honestly, second place, I would put plywood, again, for the reasons I listed. After that, Alumilite, just because it's so light, that's an advantage. But yeah, so I don't really have like which one is best for you. That's kind of up to you after going through, your checklist of pros and cons. So it's just something to consider when you build your own splitter. In the video description below, I'll put links to like videos of me mounting my splitter, our splitter angle video, stuff that kind of could help you out down this journey. Along with, if you want a carbon splitter, I'll put a link to our splitter page on our website. Alright guys, so that's about it for this one. Hope you kind of learned something, or at least, thought about something a little bit differently than you did coming into this. That'll kind of help you out when building your splitter. If I missed something, comment below if there's some material that you like for whatever reason. As always guys, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one.